Welcome to Superchargers. Let's go. G'day guys, I'm joined on this episode by Dr. Mary Sanders, who has over 35 years experience in integrative healing. Mary combines the intuitive wisdom of energy medicine with the proven tools of positive psychology to help others release what no longer serves them and help fully embody their physical, emotional, and spiritual selves. Mary shares her own transformative journey and how it inspired her mission to guide others toward clarity, balance, and a deeply grounded sense of self. Here is my conversation with Dr. Mary Sander.
I know you had a little bit of perhaps burnout yourself, if you'd call it that, and I know you had a relocation. And what I found as somebody who's moved countries a couple of times, a relocation is almost like a reset in a way. It's a chance to, um, it's really a chance to sort of set forward on a new. I don't know. There's just something about being in an entirely new environment that helps you sort of work on that stuff that perhaps wasn't working for you in the past. Was that the case for you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel, for phrasing it that way. I indeed did go through a burnout. It was pretty traumatic for me. I'm happy to share my story, but quite honestly, I have had the opportunity over the last several years with some internal healing process to restore the benefits that I received through my journey. But for the sake of the listeners, burnout is it's real. It happens. And it is something that gets to be honored in some way, shape, or form, meaning that if you choose to continue on the path that you are without any changes, you may not enjoy the outcome. You may not enjoy it, and you may suffer consequences, physical, emotional, and energetic. So, Daniel, to answer your question, yes, my journey has been very wow, anything but linear. I don't even know if
Mhm.
I want to say that it's been circular anymore. I started off as a chiropractor at a very young age. At the age of 25, I was self-employed. And anybody that's been through a professional training, you learn your trade, but you don't necessarily learn how to run a successful business. And so through just perseverance and resilience, and just determination, really, I stuck to it. And after 20 some odd years being self-employed, I developed a rather successful practice. In fact, I had multiple practices. And so what ended up happening is that I got away from the art of healing, the hands-on healing, which was what motivated me to get into the profession. And then I got romanced by the business aspect of it, and then that governed my driving force. So I lost sight of what true north was. So from the outsider's perspective, it looked like I had an extremely successful practice, which I did, but Daniel, I was miserable underneath it all. Okay.
Mm.
So when my husband was offered the opportunity to relocate to Ho Chi Minh City, wow, I had to really digest that. I was like, can I really walk away from all of this? And I went, but I struggled. So after we decided to uproot, we literally sold everything. So my practices, my home, my possessions. We were committed to the journey of living internationally. And so when I woke up in Ho Chi Minh City, Daniel, I went through this crises. Who am I? What do I stand for? What's my purpose? How did I get here? And what was the last 23 years? What was that, by the way? So I did what any normal and sane person would do. I ran away from Ho Chi Minh City, right? About a month after we landed there, and I landed in Bali, Indonesia. The purpose of my visit was to complete the yoga teacher's training certification. I've been a yogi since the age of 21, so I thought I would go and, deepen my understanding and my awareness for my own personal practice, really. But what happened was, because I was there for over a month in Bali by myself for the first time, right? I had the opportunity. I was blessed with time and I fell in love with meditation. So I carried my meditation practice back to Ho Chi Minh City. And I really started to, Daniel, for the lack of better words, I started to experience some really magical and beautiful things. And so my curiosity got piqued, and I was like, hey, wow, okay. So, Mary, your training, your professional training gives you an awareness and a knowledge base of what's happening from the neck on down. But what's happening in the space between the ears? I mean, something really beautiful is happening. And so that led me to study the neuroscience behind meditation with Dr. Tal Ben Shahar. And with him and his guidance, I was able to pacify my intellectual understanding and think further back into my experience, my experiential awareness, because things were coming online that I knew innately that I had within my toolbox since I was born. But why all of the sudden was I starting to tap into all of this intuitive information? So time passed and life happened, and we went through another move. We moved to Bogota, Colombia, and then I had the death of two beautiful family members. And finally, I was like, I really enjoy what we're doing with the emphasis of positive psychology, but I still have something that I need to be of service. I'm not done being of service to people in the healing industry. And that's when I embarked upon my training at the Academy of Intuition Medicine in Sausalito, California. And so my intention for going to this school was to additional training, but to really allow myself to trust my intuition more, because I've always kind of had this natural ability to be clairsentient, to feel what other people were feeling. And then through my years of being a chiropractor, I'm incredibly, I have a strong psychometry, but I came from a family that believed in formal education. So how could I know these tools if I wasn't formally taught them? So now I fast forward it in Daniel, I get to combine all of my strengths as a chiropractor, as a positive psychologist, and also as a medical intuitive or an energetic healer, and show up in this world as a medical intuitive. So it's really, oh goodness, the journey has been up and down, but wow, it's so beautiful to combine and to step into all of one's strengths.
It's an awesome combination you have there. And what's interesting
Thanks.
about that early part of your journey is that you were essentially doing something holistic in terms of the work you were doing. But like you said, the romance aspect of the business kind of became the driving thing that eventually led to you having to like make change. I just found that interesting because it would make sense if you were in a job that was completely misaligned with this place of service or whatever it may be. But the fact that you were doing holistic work, but the business side kind of took, I find that really interesting because often it's, the burnout comes because you're just doing something that's not aligned at all. So that's a different type of, call it burnout. I also love that you said you've restoried that. Story is such a big part. The stories we tell ourselves, story just comes into play so much. I spent a month in Ho Chi Minh, and for me, it was quite an intense time, but it was a very sensory place. I found lots of heightened senses. It was really a fascinating month. I spent there, but again, it's interesting. You had to step away from that to Bali to get some meditation, call it tools, and then come back in, and then from there Um, I've kind of just summarized what I found interesting about your journey there. But it's just beautiful that you're now combining all these different aspects because it's multi-layered and complex.
Mhm.
But even so, you've kind of narrowed that. The on the intuition, I've sometimes I describe it like a muscle, because like you said, with your upbringing and so on, um, perhaps it was a little bit more logical and kind of practical based. How do we exercise the muscle of intuition?
Well, that's a beautiful question. And I want to go back to something that you said about traveling and reset and your experience about being in Ho Chi Minh City and that it's a very sensory loaded place. And that is a wonderful description of that bustling city.
Mm.
And my experience, and this is going to a roundabout way ask, how do we exercise the muscles in order to maintain our intuition? And I think it is, for me, establishing a state of curiosity and youthfulness. So, for example, when I landed in Ho Chi Minh City, I felt 5 years old.
Mm.
I didn't have any command of the language. Obviously, in Vietnamese is an incredibly challenging language, and being hearing impaired, and it's a tonal language, I couldn't hear the different intonations that they were saying in their words. So, to make a long story short, I no longer could ask for a cup of coffee or ask for a glass of water, let alone, can I have some salt and pepper? So, if you take away the intellect and your ability to communication, then all of a sudden you're forced into a state of youthfulness in which you are perceiving the world above and beyond the traditional five senses. And as I just mentioned, one of my traditional five senses is compromised by 50%. My hearing capacity is 50% of the normal person. So this goes back into my early upbringing, my first 3 years of my life, and that was I couldn't hear in my environment, and I had no contextual understanding as to what my sisters were communicating to me, or my mother was communicating, or my father was communicating. So because of this deficiency or impairment within my physical hearing, I developed, for survival, I developed the awareness to perceive and receive information above and beyond the traditional five senses, also known as intuition, tapping in, whether it be direct knowing, clairvoyance, clairsentience, psychometry, just to name a few. And so when we put ourselves in an environment as adults that take away our resources of the intellect, I do believe that that maximizes our training ability to exercise the muscles for intuition.
Mm.
Now, is that the only way to do it? No, I think meditation and internal work and breath work and movement, I think that those are also wonderful tools. But for me, experientially, to embody the intuition, that's what works for me.
So interesting you say that because I've experienced that here in Germany as well. When I first came here, I couldn't order a loaf of bread, in my 30s. And I was sort of like, I was like, am I ready? Do I have the energy to embrace a foreign culture and learn an entirely new, difficult language? Like Vietnamese is, like you say, Vietnamese is tonal, German's grammatically like rocket science. But exactly like exactly like you say, because I sort of stepped out of the noise, I had to rely on other, the unspoken thing. Um, and I realized that was quite cool. I'd initially sit on a train and it would just be a wall of sound because I didn't understand anything. And I was sort of uh, call it ignorance is bliss because once I started to understand what people were saying, I realized everybody's complaining about the same things worldwide. I kind of missed that state of bliss because I think it did trigger some internal reflection and so on because I just didn't understand what was going on around me. So I can really relate to that. And that's why I think that term muscle or whatever it may be is about eliminating those other things that might be a distraction from the inner
Mhm.
voice or the inner knowing or sense it might be.
Yeah, I agree. I believe that many of us are highly sensitive to begin with, right? We're highly sensitive, beautiful spirits living in a physical body, in a human body. And then all of a sudden, the environment can be overwhelming to the point of distraction and discomfort, really. And so you kind of skits out like you don't want to be in the physical body when there's that much discordance. And then I'll say that There was a comment that I was going to make about your experience being on the train, and you're like, oh, wow, okay, so this was nothing new. I really wasn't missing all that much information. I'd rather really be able to tune it out right now. And I think that that's okay. Meaning that if somebody were to say, hey, Mary, would you take 100% of your hearing? I would say, that would be a definitive no.
Mm.
That
Interesting.
would
Yeah.
be a definitive no, because that is too much information for me.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Too much.
um, so in terms of people's call it, I was listening to one of your podcast episodes, and you were talking about some of the distortions we find in our energies, and I love that you have this balance between kind of science and traditional medicine and the intuitive side. But what are some of the, call it, distortions in energy that you see the common? I mean, you had blockages, imbalances, and a compromised biofield. Can you elaborate on those a little bit?
I sure can. And I'm just tickled pink that you took the time to kind of reference some of the recordings, because my premise, the mission, the whole purpose that I hold space for this podcast is to bridge that gap between hardcore science that has been proven and the science that has yet to be proven. Because I've been a practitioner in the alternative healing arts for over 30 years now.
Mm.
And let me tell you something. I do stuff that has yet to be proven. And the patients are like, I don't care if it's proven or not, it's working for me. Will you continue doing that? So the patients are the ones that dictate, in my personal and professional experience, dictates that this stuff works. Okay? The stuff works. And the episode that you're making reference to, and this is a very, very common distortion that I see and experience amongst people that I hold space for, and that is our ability to establish strong energetic boundaries via the electric, the magnetic, and the light body that surrounds us. And what is missing from that ingredient, why so many people experience challenges with that, is because they're lacking the awareness and the knowing of safety. We are so fear driven that it prevents us from sinking, connecting, and grounding down into the most sustainable energy source that we have, and that's the beautiful earth. That is so nurturing. The earth energy is nurturing, loving, compassionate, saturating, forgiving. And so when you can literally establish that two-way communication with the earth's frequency, you start to feel more resourced. And what I mean by that is that you have the ability to self-soothe. You can let go of some of the fear and the anxiety. And then, Daniel, something really magical begins to happen where then you become more present, like energetically and physically in time. And time is such a weird thing to begin with, but you become more aware of present time consciousness. So that's a really common distortion I see, is when there are rips or holes or perforations or distortions within one's biofield, which essentially comes from the environment, and then it starts to impact the personal energetic systems in the physical body. So that's the premise, literally the premise of how I hold space for other people as a medical intuitive, to balance all of those systems.
Balance, yeah, balance is key. Sometimes I think of the piece of, like, the pie, the segments of the pie, whatever they may be in the areas of life, albeit health, creativity, relationships, if there's perhaps seven pieces of those pie, how do you go about finding that balance of the pie, call it?
I go in and out of it just like you do.
Mm.
However, However, I have a fond appreciation for the generation of the life force energy that we exude from our energy centers is intended to harmonize within the environment. And so what do I mean by that? Meaning that if the energy centers are in a distortion, let's just take the first energy center, the first chakra, located deep within the pelvic bowl. It's most intimately connected with the earth. It's most intimately connected with safety, survival, trust, prosperity, purpose. Those are the primal things that we strive for. But if there is a distortion within that energy field, then what gets mirrored back to us from the environment is that distorted view or that distorted perception. And so when you talk about harmony, and again, I love your imagery of the pie, because when I think about a circular spectrum, I see those wedges kind of popping out. Like it's never that the circumference is never a smooth circle. There's always a distortion that comes out of it. You referenced a missing piece of pie, which is just as accurate. But the harmony, when I think about harmonizing with the environment so that I can manifest a reality that is more balanced, that is very holistic in viewpoint, and also it shifts. It's not stagnant. So there may be a period in my life where I'm focused on my internal reflection, or there is a period in my life where I'm focused on growing a business, or there's a period in my life where I'm focused on relationships or health or finances. So I have come to realize that everything has its cycle and its time within life. And when I talk about balance, I don't think that there's ever a balance within those aspects where everything is getting 100% of your attention 100% of the time. But my intention is just to harmonize so that I'm not creating my energy that I put out. I'm not pushing out a distorted energy, because if I'm pushing out a distorted energy, I'm going to get the distortion right back,
Mm.
whether I want it or not.
It's such, yeah, it really does that distorted. It's an awesome way to describe it. This distorted field and the distortion. I just think of a guitar or an amp, and the distorted sounds kind of echoing straight back. Um, yeah, I'm sort of, I'm aware, I'm aware when that's happening, but it's not easy to. But like you say, that grounding of yourself can help you get back to an undistorted place, I guess. But the introspection you're talking about as well, again, listening to you, I found it interesting when you were talking about with introspection, it's, can also come rumination. And when we over ruminate, that can be a little bit of it's almost like, would you call that too much introspection?
Well, I'm gonna go one step further, Daniel, because you're bringing up a really valid point. Okay. So and I talked about being in present time a few moments ago, and I believe that many of us are driven to be focused on the unknown of the future. And with that comes a certain amount of anxiety. And so energetically, what I witness when I see people that way, they have more of a biofield in their front part of their body. So they're projecting themselves in the future. The rumination that you're talking about is just the opposite. So when people are in a position in that they're thinking about the past, they literally shift backwards in their biofield. And that can lead to depression. So when we're in present time consciousness and we are, I keep using the word resourced, but we're well balanced, and here's balanced again. When we are in the center of the biofield, and there is equidistance of the electromagnetic current above and below and to the sides and to the front and back, then that will take away the rumination even in a state of introspection.
Yeah, that I love the physicality in that. I found, but personally, like going through therapy, which was very important. It was a lot of intellectualizing, which was very necessary to have somebody take an objective look and be able to kind of piece things together. But some other things I've found much more beneficial at certain stages of life has been when I've brought the physicality into things, because all this stuff sits in the body. And what you're saying there about sort of physically leaning back or forward, I think that definitely plays a part in what you're kind of sending out how we posture ourselves. There's just so much to the physical manifestation of whatever's whatever's going on. And I guess as a chiropractor, you would have seen a lot of physical manifestation of things.
True. And I always ask every new patient that comes into my office, why do you have this pain pattern? Well, I don't know. Well, if you did know, if you did know, what would the reason be? And so, because I believe intuitively, if we are aware and connected to our physical bodies, we can understand the origin better, if you will, the origin of where the pain pattern starts, whether it be a small t trauma, a big T trauma. You're singing my song, Daniel, when you start saying it comes from the body is so smart, so wise. It never ceases to amaze me. And I've been working with the human body for over 30 years. And I hope to work for another 30 more years just so I can learn, just that much more information about it. But the body and its ability to store energetically trauma and uh, adverse reaction, childhood events, mindset issues, it absolutely does. It holds distortions, and that's what gets projected out to the environment.
So how does one release those areas?
I think the first step is awareness.
Mm.
Okay. So when you're working with a somatic therapist, which it sounds like you were, then to guide a person in, and this is so counterintuitive, Daniel. Oh, you've got pain in your low back? Well, I want you to kind of connect into that pain. I want you to lean into it. And people are like, I'm not leaning into that. That's uncomfortable. That's tight. That's constricted. That's painful. I want to lean away from it. I understand. I understand. But can we just simply just kind of glance at it from a distance and just ask what it's trying to tell us, or more specifically, what it needs from us? And then I promise we're just gonna lean into it for a moment, and then we're gonna do the pendular swing into a space, a different area of the body that has more spaciousness, that doesn't feel tight, constricted, or in pain. And then spend our time in that awareness. And then we'll go back in, lean in, just kind of listen, kind of feel, kind of ask, and then lean out. If you do that enough time in a respectful way, you will get the messages as to what your body needs from you. Sometimes it's just like, hey man, chill out, or boy, you need rest, rest, rest. Just simple things that the body tries to tell us, but we're often times in a dysregulated central nervous system state. We're so revved up that we can't hear what the body is trying to say to us
The noise again.
in ways.
But I love what you're doing there, because you're essentially encouraging one to potentially lean into the discomfort a little, and that's counterintuitive, but actually leaning into it may be as opposed for it to straying away from it, which isn't an easy thing to do, like you say, with patients' responses. But lean into the discomforts. That's where the growth can happen.
That's the juicy stuff, man.
I Yeah, I was calling myself a fully recovered perfectionist. I think was that what I was calling myself? But I don't know if I'm fully recovered. I still struggle with perfectionism. I'm fully aware of how kind of crippling it can be, especially in terms of just getting things out there. And yeah, someone who's had quite a high inner critic. What are your thoughts around perfectionism and a high level of inner critic?
What prompted you to ask me that question? Okay, all right. So here's the scoop. This is what I've learned. All right. I too have had perfectionism deeply rooted within my DNA. I'm telling you, people, it's within the trillions of the cells within my physical body. And it cost me a lot. It did. And so I, like you, if it was a project and it was worth doing, then I was told, my mindset was, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it 110%, right? And you're going to do it perfectly in order to get the execution out to the world. It was never about, is it good enough? Leaning into, instead of saying, is it perfect? Is it ready? Is it like spotless? Can you lean into the idea, is it good enough to get the message across? Okay.
Mm,
That was, and it sounds, I mean, in the English language, that sounds like a minor distinction in the word, but that's a huge radical like leap for somebody
mm,
who truly is a perfectionist. And what I found, energetically speaking, within the space of the heart center, which people normally just say, oh yeah, well, the heart's all about love. Well, yes, it's about love for self, love for others. And then really deeper, it's about compassion. And then again, it becomes about compassion for self first, then compassion for others. And then underneath that is the element of forgiveness for self. And that forgiveness gets very intimately tied into the perfectionistic role, that I have to forgive myself for not being perfect. And that, yes, there is an element of self-worthiness associated with self-love. So it's a multi-layered
mm.
healing journey. At least my healing journey was not fast around that one. I had to bump up against it. I still, I have to say I've come a really, really long ways when it comes to perfectionism. Maybe I bump into it, I don't know. I'm gonna say like maybe twice a year, but I'm quick to realize, like, because there's so much energy behind it, I'm like, whoa, that's not my MO, and I back off. So I'm talking about decades of healing around this one, Daniel. So um hopefully that gives you some insight, because if I can spare you part of that journey, then I then, good on
No,
us, right?
no, I think that's really cool to refer to it as a multi-layered thing. It's easy to get caught on the kind of surface of just trying to make something perfect, but when you strip that down to the layers, like you say, where's are you being you're being hard on yourself and the self-compassion that needs to come into there. Focusing on that a little bit may ease the this relentless need for the perfection, which is kind of the layer on top. So that's a nice sort of reframe to hear about those layers underneath it. It's easy to just get caught on the surface of something, but what's going on behind the
Mhm.
perfectionist? And you're right, it's multi-layered, complex, and takes years, I think. And again, as always, seems to come back to awareness. Um, it's hard to change things without the awareness there. On this show, that's just come up a lot. Awareness has just come up constantly in terms of it's only possible to bring about some kind of change if the awareness is there.
Yeah. Daniel, as I'm listening to you, I intuitively am led to share with you and with the audience that one of my favorite, when I find that I'm going back into the idea of perfectionistic attitudes, one of the things that's really helpful for me is a tapping technique. And this was
Mm,
gifted to me by another healer. A tapping technique in the middle of the sternum doesn't have to be a hard technique or a hard tap, But the mantra that went behind it is I love myself in service to my highest self. I love myself in service to my highest self. So that always keeps into the perspective as to what your purpose is from a higher dimension. So if that's your intention to align with, you can certainly find more self-love and compassion for yourself in this physical body. So that's been really healing for me. I find that I do that, when I'm in yoga, in final shavasana, or after like a camel pose or a big heart opening pose. That's what I find myself doing. It's just reminding myself there's something much bigger that's outside of me that I align with, and that, if I get stuck on the physical plane and worried about perfectionism, then I need to realign my intentions.
I like that it's when you say intuitively you needed to do that, that's so cool. I try to do it as well in like in these conversations intuitively if something needs to come through. That's really not an easy thing to do because it's, there's this logic element, or should I stick to questions or whatever it might be, but to allow that like intuition and just trust it. Trust is the trust. That's the big one there, I think. Trust to
Yeah.
exercise it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, you get to ignore your intuition so many times and you're like, I knew that. I knew that. Why did I do that? And so, you do that just enough times and they're like, I'm done with that. I'm just going to lean into my intuition and I'm going to listen and I'm going to respond and I may not know why, but that's what's guiding me.
Mm. The North Compass, as you said at the start of the conversation. There's so many wonderful resources on your website. Where can people find those
Hmm.
resources, and what are they?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to share. So my website is www.drmarysanders.com. There are three things I'd like to point your awareness to. The first one is that I have a gift that I want to make sure all the listeners have the opportunity to download. And it is a series of three meditations. It's an ultimate meditation for unlocking your authentic self. And really, these are the first three meditations or guided imageries that I use with all of my patients in the medical intuition. So I am connecting you into the resources of the earth. I am bringing you back into present time consciousness. And I teach like this neutral separation technique. So that's the first thing. Please go download the resources. The second thing is on my or on my website is the podcast. If you are turned on by topics that align the mind, body, and spirit from a scientific perspective, then join us because we do get into some juicy conversation, just like Daniel has created today. And then there's a discovery call button on the actual website. And I really want to invite the listeners, if you're like, hey, I'm kind of resonating with what this lady's saying, but I don't know. I don't know if what I'm dealing with is something that she would be willing to work with or is something that she's had success with. Or I believe in energy medicine. I don't know if she's the person to support me. Those are natural questions. And so if you're sitting in that space, pick up the phone. Let's talk. Let's see each other face to face because there's so much that happens. Even though, Daniel's in Germany and I'm here in Colorado, I'm telling you, my resonance and being able to connect with him is intimate. And so you're going to know intuitively once we have the discovery call, hey, is energy medicine right for you? Do you want a medical intuitive? Am I the right person? Because you should be loaded with questions and you should find the person that you resonate with.
Yeah,
Those are
there's
my belief system.
there's definitely even through it's amazing, even through these screens, I believe that too. There is still this ability to connect and have that resonation come through. Um,
Energy is not bound by time nor space.
what would you say to somebody, just to bring it home to somebody who's perhaps struggling at the moment, just to kind of put one foot in front of the other?
Oh, wow. Bring it back to the breath. Bring it back to the breath. I know that we can do so much when we're in control of the breath, meaning that if you can do a simple box count, count to 4 as you inhale, hold your breath for 4, exhale for 4, hold your breath for 4. That box breathing will shift your awareness. And if you don't want to count, then just set the intention to lengthen through your exhalation. Because physiologically, you're tripping your neurology to slide into a parasympathetic dominance. And that's where the healing begins.
Yeah, that's huge. It's huge. Simple, but huge. It's so easy just to get into shallow breathing, and that, like we've spoken about, the different impact that can have on your whole system. So yeah, really important. No, well, it's been awesome. I could talk to you for hours. We'll perhaps have to do it again. But thank you so much for all the insights that you've. Well, it's awesome to connect.
Likewise, I feel you.
There you go, guys. Honest ratings for the show on Apple are appreciated. If you have a guest suggestion, please feel free to reach out on my website at danielthomas.co. I'm also on social media at Mr. Dan Thomas. Catch you on the next episode.